Rejected and alone in the woods, the Omega was found when the Alpha King stepped in to protect her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to Elena Hart. The night the pack turned away from her smelled like cold pine and damp earth, the kind of chill that slipped under a thin jacket and stayed there, settling into the bones. Elena stood at the edge of the clearing while the others formed a neat half-circle beneath the lanterns, their faces carefully neutral, their eyes trained anywhere but on her. The air hovered around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the moonlight felt pale and distant, as if even the sky had decided not to take sides. The elder's words were measured and polite, spoken with the practiced calm of someone delivering a decision already made, and when he said her name, it sounded like the end of a sentence rather than the beginning of one. Rejected. The word didn't echo, didn't thunder, it simply landed and stayed. No one shouted, no one argued, and that was somehow worse. Elena nodded because that was what was expected, because standing still felt safer than falling apart, and because her voice had gone quiet inside her chest. She took 3 steps back, then 4, until the light no longer reached her boots, and with each step the warmth of the clearing faded, replaced by the steady breath of the forest beyond. She turned away before anyone could look relieved. The trail into the woods was narrow and familiar, a path she had walked 100 times in daylight, but tonight it stretched longer than it ever had, bending away into shadow. Branches whispered overhead, and the scent of moss and wet leaves wrapped around her like a memory she hadn't asked for. She counted her breaths and the crunch of gravel underfoot, measuring distance the only way she could, by time and effort, until the lanterns behind her were no more than pinpricks. A mile passed, then another half, and the quiet grew heavier, pressing in until even her thoughts softened to a hush. Elena paused near a fallen log and rested her palm against the bark, grounding herself in its roughness, reminding herself that she was still here, that the world had not ended just because her place in it had shifted. The woods were not cruel, she told herself, they were honest. The night offered no promises, but it offered space, and for the first time since the words had been spoken, her shoulders eased a fraction. She listened to the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, to the distant creek murmuring somewhere downhill, and to the wind moving through the trees like a patient witness. Alone did not mean invisible, she decided, even if it felt that way now. Somewhere beyond the dark, beyond the bend of the trail and the weight of what had been decided without her, the forest held its breath, as if waiting for something to change. The forest closed around Elena as she moved deeper, the air growing cooler with every step until it hovered just above freezing, sharp enough to sting her lungs when she breathed too fast. She wrapped her arms around herself and followed the faint slope downhill, guided by instinct more than sight, until the trees thinned and the sound of running water reached her ears. The creek was narrow but fast, its surface catching bits of moonlight as it slipped over stones worn smooth by years of patience. Elena crouched near the bank and dipped her fingers into the water, gasping softly at the cold before forcing herself to drink. It tasted clean, metallic, and real, grounding her in a way nothing else had since she left the clearing. When she straightened, her knees trembled, not from fear but from exhaustion finally asking to be noticed. She had walked close to 2 miles since turning away from the pack, and every muscle reminded her of it. Elena found a shallow hollow beneath a cluster of pines where the wind broke just enough to offer shelter, and she lowered herself onto the ground, pulling her jacket tighter and pressing her back against the tree. She listened, not for danger, but for rhythm. The forest had one if you paid attention, a steady pattern of rustling needles, distant water, and the occasional call of a night bird. It was not silence. It was balance. Her thoughts drifted despite her efforts to hold them still, replaying the moment her name had been spoken and the way no one had reached for her afterward. She wondered how something could end without a sound, how a life could be divided into before and after by a single sentence delivered in a calm voice. Elena pressed her palm against the ground and focused on the sensation of cold earth, reminding herself that she was still breathing, still capable of choosing her next step. The ache in her chest softened, replaced by a quiet determination that surprised her. She would not disappear just because it was easier for others that way. Time passed in small increments measured by the slow drift of clouds across the moon, and just as her eyelids grew heavy, the forest shifted. It was subtle, the way a room changes when someone enters without speaking. The air felt thicker, charged, and the night sounds pulled back as if making room. Elena lifted her head, heart quickening, every sense alert. She did not see anyone, but she felt the presence, deep and steady, like the weight of a mountain settled into the ground. Her instincts whispered caution, yet panic did not follow. Instead, there was a strange sense of order, as if something larger than fear had arrived. She stood slowly, brushing pine needles from her jeans, and turned toward the slope above the creek. The pressure grew stronger there, not threatening, but unmistakable, and Elena realized she was not alone in the woods anymore. She did not know who or what had found her, only that the night itself seemed to be paying attention now, holding still as if waiting to see what would happen next. Elena drew a steady breath and took one careful step forward, unaware that this quiet moment, this pause between heartbeats, was the last instant of true solitude she would know for a very long time. Elena took another step toward the slope, her boots sliding slightly on damp leaves, and steadied herself with a hand against a tree as the sensation around her deepened, not loud or sudden, but heavy with purpose. The air felt warmer here, as if the forest itself had drawn closer, and she realized her fear had shifted into something quieter, more alert. She told herself to turn back, to stay by the creek where she understood the ground beneath her feet, but curiosity held her in place. The presence was not chasing her, not closing in, simply there, unwavering, like a watchful horizon. She inhaled slowly, counting to 4, then released the breath just as carefully, reminding herself that panic would only steal what little strength she had left. The memory of the clearing returned without invitation, the orderly faces, the polite distance, the way the word rejected had settled into her bones. She pressed her lips together and lifted her chin, refusing to let that moment define every step she took afterward. If this forest held something unknown, she would meet it standing. A low wind moved through the branches above, carrying with it a scent that was not pine or water, something clean and sharp, like cold air after a storm. Elena paused, her heart steadying as the ground leveled out, and she became aware of how small she felt in that instant. Not weak, but unprotected, a single figure beneath towering trees that had seen centuries pass without asking permission. She wondered briefly if the pack would notice her absence by morning, if anyone would look toward the woods and think of her, then dismissed the thought as unhelpful. What mattered was now, the way the night seemed to hold its breath, the way her instincts urged her to pay attention. She shifted her weight and scanned the shadows, her eyes adjusting until shapes separated from darkness, trunks and rocks and fallen branches resolving into clarity. There was still no movement she could see, yet the certainty remained, solid and undeniable. Elena felt it in her chest, a steady pressure that was neither threat nor comfort, simply fact. She had the strange sense that whatever had found her had been aware of her long before she sensed it in return. The idea sent a ripple of unease through her, quickly followed by an unexpected calm. If she was seen, then she was not lost. The thought surprised her enough that she almost laughed, a soft breath escaping instead. She drew her jacket closer and took another step, then another, until she reached a small rise where the ground dropped away into a shallow clearing. Moonlight spilled across it, pale and even, revealing nothing out of place, and yet Elena knew she had crossed some invisible line. The pressure shifted then, not increasing, but focusing, as if attention had settled fully on her. Her heartbeat slowed, aligning with the steady rhythm of the forest, and for the first time since leaving the pack, she felt a sense of being exactly where she was meant to stand. Elena squared her shoulders and waited, trusting that whatever came next would come on its own terms. In the quiet that followed, she did not feel judged or measured, only observed, and that alone was a change she could feel down to her core. The clearing remained still, moonlight resting across the ground like a held breath, and Elena felt the presence draw closer without a single sound to mark its approach. The pressure she sensed was not weight but certainty, the kind that made excuses feel unnecessary. She became aware of details she would have missed before, the way the air carried warmth despite the cold night, hovering near 38 degrees Fahrenheit, the way the forest no longer felt vast but attentive. Her instincts, usually quick to warn, were quiet now, not asleep, but listening, and that silence told her more than fear ever could. Elena shifted her stance to steady herself, planting her feet shoulder-width apart, grounding her weight into the earth as if the soil itself could answer her questions. She thought of the years she had spent trying to be smaller, quieter, easier to overlook, and realized how strange it felt to be the center of something unseen. The memory of rejection no longer burned as sharply. Instead, it hovered at the edges of her awareness like a chapter she had already turned. A subtle movement caught her eye near the edge of the trees, not a shape-breaking cover but a change in focus, as if the darkness itself had decided where to look. Her breath caught, then evened out, and she resisted the urge to step back. Whatever stood beyond the shadows was not hiding out of fear, and that alone shifted the balance of the moment. Elena lifted her chin, allowing herself to be seen, her heart steady in a way that surprised her. She did not know why, but she trusted the quiet authority she felt in the air, a calm that did not demand submission or explanation. The scent returned, clean and sharp, carrying with it the suggestion of winter and open sky, and Elena felt a pull she could not name, not attraction, not command, simply recognition. She wondered if this was how paths crossed when neither side was looking for the other, when intention mattered less than timing. The presence stopped just beyond the reach of the light, close enough that she felt it clearly now, a steady awareness that wrapped around the clearing like an unspoken promise. Elena swallowed and spoke her name aloud, not loudly, just enough to anchor herself, the sound of it grounding her in the moment. The forest did not echo it back, but the silence that followed felt deliberate, respectful. She found herself thinking that being noticed did not have to mean being judged, that being seen could be as simple as being acknowledged without condition. Her shoulders eased, tension draining away inch by inch, replaced by a cautious calm. The night seemed to tilt, the balance shifting in her favor without any action required from her at all. Elena took a slow step forward into the moonlight, trusting that the ground would hold, trusting that whatever had found her had done so with intention. She did not yet see a face or hear a voice, but she felt the weight of attention settle fully, and with it came a certainty she had never known before. She was not here by accident, and for the first time since leaving the pack, the idea did not frighten her. It steadied her, rooted her in place, ready for whatever truth would finally step out of the shadows. The shift happened without spectacle, no sudden movement or sound, just a quiet certainty resolving into form at the edge of the clearing, and Elena realized she was no longer imagining the presence because it was no longer content to remain unseen. A tall figure stepped forward into the moonlight, his outline defined first, broad shoulders, and an easy stillness that suggested complete control over the space he occupied. He did not rush, did not reach for her, and yet the forest itself seemed to lean subtly in his direction, as if acknowledging a familiar authority. Elena felt it immediately, the difference between strength that demanded attention and strength that simply existed, and her breath caught for reasons she did not fully understand. The man stopped several yards away, far enough to respect her space. Close enough that she could see his face clearly now, calm and focused, eyes reflecting the pale light with a clarity that made her feel as though he saw more than her shape standing there. He did not speak right away, and in that silence Elena found no judgment, only awareness, the kind that weighed a moment carefully before deciding what mattered. The pressure in the air settled into something steadier, no longer surrounding her, but anchoring the clearing itself, drawing an invisible boundary that felt protective rather than restrictive. Elena became aware of how cold she was then, the thin jacket no match for the night, and she noticed, with a start, that the chill seemed less sharp within that boundary, as if the space itself had warmed by a few degrees. The realization made her shift her weight, unsure what to do with the attention now focused entirely on her. She lifted her chin slightly, meeting his gaze because it felt easier than looking away. There was recognition there, not personal, not intimate, but certain, as if her presence made sense to him in a way it had not to anyone else. He took one measured step closer and stopped again, maintaining the distance with deliberate care, and Elena understood that this restraint was a choice, not a limitation. The forest remained quiet, held in check by his presence, and she wondered fleetingly if this was how the world felt when rules were enforced without cruelty. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and even, carrying easily through the clearing without effort, and he asked a simple question, one that did not assume, did not accuse, but acknowledged her right to stand there. Elena answered honestly, her voice steady despite the strangeness of the moment, and as she spoke her name, she saw something shift in his expression, not surprise, but confirmation. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that felt significant without being dramatic, and in that small movement, she sensed respect offered without condition. The air seemed to settle further, the night resuming its quiet rhythm now that the balance had been restored. Elena realized then that she was safe, not because she had been hidden away or overlooked, but because someone with the power to decide had chosen to pay attention. She did not yet know who he was, only that his presence carried the weight of authority and restraint in equal measure, and that whatever path had led her into the woods had brought her exactly where she needed to be. As the moonlight framed them both, standing within the calm boundary of the clearing, Elena felt the certainty deepen, quiet and unshakable, that the moment she had feared since leaving the pack had already passed, replaced by something far more consequential. Elena became aware of movement beyond the edge of the clearing, not sudden or aggressive, but enough to draw her attention away for a brief second. And in that moment the man stepped forward with deliberate calm, placing himself slightly ahead of her without touching her at all. The shift was subtle yet unmistakable, the way a doorway changes when someone stands in it, and Elena felt the boundary of the space adjust around them, widening just enough to include her fully behind him. He did not raise his voice or make a show of authority, but the forest responded anyway, the distant sounds softening as if the night itself had acknowledged a line drawn. Elena realized then that protection did not always arrive as a shield raised in haste. Sometimes it arrived as presence, steady and unyielding, refusing to allow the world to press any closer. The man spoke again, his words few and precise, carried on a tone that left no room for debate, and though he did not name a threat, the intent was clear enough that Elena felt a weight lift from her chest. She was no longer standing alone in the open. The air warmed perceptibly, the chill retreating just enough that she could unclench her hands, and she noticed how her breathing slowed in response, matching the steady rhythm set by the figure in front of her. He shifted his stance slightly, feet planted with quiet confidence, and Elena sensed that this position was not accidental but practiced, chosen because it worked. She did not feel hidden or diminished behind him. Instead, she felt acknowledged, included in the space he had claimed. The realization settled into her with surprising clarity, bringing with it a calm she had not known she was capable of. She listened as he spoke once more, a single statement that defined the moment without drama, and she understood instinctively that it was not meant for her alone. It was meant for the forest, for anything listening, for the night itself. The message was simple and final. Elena's heart was not unclaimed, not unguarded, not subject to whatever uncertainty the woods might offer. She belonged within the boundary he had drawn, and that boundary would be respected. The forest seemed to accept this declaration without resistance, the quiet deepening into something like agreement. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from fear, but from the sudden release of a tension she had carried for longer than she could remember. She had spent years learning how to endure being overlooked, how to survive without drawing attention, and now attention had found her anyway, not to judge but to protect. The man did not turn to look at her immediately, maintaining his focus outward, and Elena understood that this too was intentional, a way of giving her space to breathe without scrutiny. When he finally glanced back, it was brief and reassuring, a silent confirmation that she was exactly where she should be. He removed his outer layer without hesitation and held it out to her, not pressing it into her hands, simply offering, and Elena accepted with a quiet nod, the warmth settling over her shoulders like a promise kept. As she wrapped it around herself, she realized that the moment had already changed her path, not through force or command, but through a choice made calmly and without condition. Whatever waited beyond the trees, whatever questions remained unanswered, one truth was now certain. She was under his protection, and the night itself knew it. The quiet after his declaration felt different from any silence Elena had known before, no longer empty but settled, as if the night had rearranged itself around a new truth. She stood wrapped in his coat, the fabric heavy and warm, carrying the faint scent of cold air and distant pine, and she realized how long it had been since anyone had offered her something without expecting anything in return. He turned fully toward her then, his attention no longer outward but focused, and for the first time she felt the weight of his gaze without fear. It was not intrusive or demanding, simply present, the way a steady horizon anchored the eye. Elena met his look, aware of the contrast between them, her slight frame and tired posture against his quiet strength, and yet she did not feel smaller for it. Instead, she felt seen in a way that reached past the surface and settled somewhere deeper. He asked her if she was injured, the question practical and calm, and she answered honestly, mentioning the fatigue, the cold, the long walk through the woods. As she spoke, she noticed how carefully he listened, not interrupting, not rushing her words, as if each detail mattered. When she finished, he nodded once, acknowledging her experience without commentary, and the simple gesture carried more weight than sympathy ever had. He told her they would move soon, not because she was in danger, but because the night was growing colder and the ground would only sap more of her strength if they lingered. There was no command in his voice, only certainty, and Elena found herself agreeing before she fully realized it. She trusted the steadiness she sensed in him, the way he balanced awareness with restraint. He gestured toward a path she had not noticed before, subtle but clear, and Elena followed his lead, surprised by how naturally her steps fell into rhythm beside his. The forest seemed to part for them, branches no longer catching at her sleeves, the ground leveling out as if the way forward had been decided. As they walked, Elena became aware of the difference his presence made, the way the night no longer pressed in on her thoughts. She found herself breathing more easily, her shoulders lowering as the tension she had carried since the clearing finally began to fade. He did not fill the quiet with unnecessary words, allowing space for her to gather herself, and she appreciated the respect implicit in that choice. After a few minutes, she realized she was no longer thinking about what she had lost, but about where she was going. The shift was subtle but profound. She asked him his name, the question slipping out before she could second-guess it, and when he answered, there was no flourish, just a simple truth offered without pretense. The sound of it settled into her memory, grounding her further in the moment. She repeated it once under her breath, not as a test, but as an acknowledgment, and he inclined his head slightly, accepting it. As they continued along the path, Elena understood that this was not a rescue in the way stories told it. Dramatic and final, but something quieter and more enduring. He was not here to carry her away from her life, but to stand with her as it changed. The realization steadied her more than any promise could have. With each step, the distance between who she had been at the edge of the clearing and who she was becoming widened, and for the first time, the uncertainty ahead felt less like a threat and more like an open door. The path opened gradually, trees thinning until the forest felt less enclosed, and Elena realized they were nearing a boundary she recognized, the subtle change in soil and the familiar curve of the land signaling the outer edge of territory she had once called home. She slowed instinctively, uncertainty brushing against her calm, and Rowan noticed immediately, matching her pace without comment. He did not urge her forward or shield her from the sight ahead, simply walking beside her with the same steady presence that had carried her this far. Lantern light flickered in the distance, muted but unmistakable, and Elena felt the old reflex stir, the urge to make herself smaller, to fade into the background before anyone could decide she did not belong. She drew a breath and felt the weight of Rowan's coat settle more firmly around her shoulders, a quiet reminder that she was not facing this moment alone. Rowan stopped a few yards short of the tree line and turned to her, his expression calm and deliberate. He told her they did not need to cross any further unless she wished to, that the choice was hers, spoken plainly without expectation. The words landed gently, offering control rather than instruction, and Elena realized how rarely anyone had done that for her. She considered the lights ahead, the place she had left hours earlier feeling erased, and then she looked back at Rowan, at the certainty in his posture and the respect in his gaze. She nodded once and took the next step on her own. They moved into the open together, not hidden, not hurried, and Elena felt the shift immediately, the way attention sharpened without a single voice rising. Figures stood near the path, silhouettes turning, recognition passing through the small group like a held breath. No one spoke at first, and in that silence Elena sensed the difference, the way Rowan's presence altered the meaning of her return. He did not announce himself or make a display of authority, but it was clear from the way others straightened, from the way the air itself seemed to settle, that they understood who walked beside her. Rowan paused and angled himself slightly toward Elena, not in front of her, not behind, but beside, a deliberate choice that felt louder than any declaration. He met the gaze of those watching and gave a single, measured nod, acknowledging without explanation. Elena felt a subtle shift ripple outward, confusion giving way to something like understanding. She was not being presented or claimed, simply recognized within the space he occupied. Rowan spoke quietly to her then, telling her that she was free to rest, that arrangements would be made without haste, and that nothing would be decided tonight beyond her comfort and safety. The assurance was steady, grounded in action rather than promise, and Elena felt her shoulders ease as the weight of the day finally began to lift. Someone stepped forward hesitantly, offering water and a blanket, their tone careful, respectful, and Elena accepted with a soft thank you, aware of the way eyes followed the exchange. Rowan remained where he was, a constant presence, his attention never drifting far from her, and she realized that this, too, was a form of protection, one that required no confrontation. As the night settled back into its rhythm, Elena understood that what had changed could not be undone. She had not returned as the Omega who had been dismissed at the edge of the clearing, but as herself, standing openly within the quiet acknowledgment of a king. The recognition was not spoken aloud, yet it carried through the space with unmistakable clarity, settling into Elena's bones like a truth she could finally stand on. Morning did not arrive all at once but crept in slowly, a pale light edging the horizon while the lanterns dimmed and the night released its hold. Elena sat near the low fire that had been kept burning through the dark hours, the warmth easing the last of the cold from her hands, and she watched the space around her change with the light. What had felt uncertain in the shadows now felt clear, grounded, as if the world itself had decided to be honest at last. Rowan stood a short distance away, speaking quietly with those who had gathered, his posture relaxed yet unmistakably authoritative, and Elena noticed how people listened, not out of fear but respect. There were no raised voices, no accusations, only practical arrangements made with calm efficiency, and she understood that this was how real power moved, without spectacle, without the need to prove itself. When Rowan returned to her side, the conversation around them softened further, attention shifting subtly toward the path ahead rather than the moment just past. He told her that she would not be asked to return to a place that had turned her away, that new accommodations had already been set aside where she could rest without pressure or expectation. The words were simple, yet they settled into Elena with a sense of permanence she had never known. She nodded, feeling the truth of them steady her, and for the first time since she had left the clearing the night before, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by rejection. Rowan did not make promises beyond what he could ensure, and that honesty mattered more to her than reassurance ever had. As the morning fully arrived, people moved with purpose, offering assistance without pity, their tone respectful, their distance appropriate. Elena accepted what she needed and declined what she did not, surprised by how natural it felt to choose without fear of consequence. Rowan remained nearby, not hovering, simply present, and she realized that his protection was not something that would be withdrawn the moment she stepped forward on her own. It was a foundation, not a cage. Before they parted to attend to their respective responsibilities, Rowan met her gaze once more and spoke quietly, telling her that what happened next would unfold at her pace, that her voice would matter in every decision that concerned her life. The certainty in his tone was not possessive or dramatic, just fact, and Elena felt something inside her align, a quiet confidence taking root. As he turned away, the space he left did not feel empty. It felt open. Elena watched him go, aware of the way eyes followed him, and then turned her attention forward, toward the path that led away from the place she had been cast out, and toward something unknown, yet undeniably hers. She rose, drawing a steady breath, and stepped into the morning with a calm she had never carried before. The woods that had once swallowed her whole now stood behind her, silent witnesses to the moment everything had changed. She had been rejected and left alone, but she had been found not by chance, but by choice, and that knowledge settled into her like a promise. Whatever came next, she would meet it standing, no longer unseen, no longer unprotected, her future reshaped by the quiet decision of a king who had stepped in and changed the course of her life forever.